I think, to me, the magic of plein air painting is in the relationship between the artist and their environment. It's not so much about the painting itself, but about being present in the moment. Just detaching from the rest of the world and truly taking in a space for what it is. It gives you time to appreciate and reflect and time to breathe. It's too easy, especially in today's world, to get caught up in the bustle and forget the beauty, because it is beautiful, and painting in nature gives me the opportunity to remember that. Once you start painting outdoors, you start to see the world a little bit differently. Start noticing the nuances that you normally would overlook. And once you learn to appreciate a rock or a branch, suddenly everything is something worth admiring. And I think that's what makes it worth doing.
Hi, I'm Alex Foltz. Today we're in Sheldon, Vermont, and we're going to do a little bit of plein air painting. We are on the walking bridge on the rail trail, and we're going to paint this river scene out here. Water's always a challenge. I've done it before well, plenty of times, but in another episode that we've recorded, and this time it's a little different. So it'll be fun to kind of try to capture that movement of the water and also get some of these fun shadows and trees we've got in the distance. And with that said, let's go ahead and hop right in. I'll be working with the usual palette of burnt umber, cadmium yellow light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and titanium white. It's a pretty limited palette. It's really only the primary colors. I love working that way. I think the less colors you have to work with, the more freeing it is to mix a variety of different colors on your painting. And with this particular arrangement, as far as limited palettes go, it really has like a great range of colors that you can mix with it. You might notice that there's no black on this palette. There's a couple reasons for that. You can mix a really nice black with ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. And unlike a black straight out of a tube, it's got some really nice colorful undertones. So when you start using it in mixtures for other colors, it gives you nice, vibrant, and interesting colors to work with. For the record, if you're planning on going out in the summer and plein air painting, we learned our lesson. Make sure to bring sunscreen. Standing in one spot under the sun can be not the greatest, especially when you're doing it for like an hour or two. Sunscreen, water, look out for yourself. First thing I do with any of my paintings is tone the canvas. I like to go for a nice warm orange, but you can tone your canvas whatever color you like. The idea is just to knock back that bright white, and it makes it a little easier to judge the colors you're putting on top of it. If you're putting colors directly on a bright white canvas, even though they're the correct color, they'll look way too dark. So you want to pick a nice mid-tone to work with. I like the orange when I'm doing landscapes, especially because it plays really nicely with all of the greens that you find out in nature. And you'll see that by the end of the painting, I've let some of that orange show through in certain areas. And it just gives it a little bit more of a dynamic look. And of course, we'll wipe off this excess so we're not working on a wet surface. Whoops. And with that, we're ready to jump in. With a lot of these canvas, or with a lot of these paintings, I like to try to follow the rule of thirds, with landscapes especially. It just gives it a little more interest. So what I'll do for that, you don't have to mark it, but it can help to mark it out, is divide this canvas up into rough thirds. And I'll put my points of interest on these lines or where these lines intersect. That just kind of makes a composition that is more pleasing to look at and leads the eye around in interesting ways. With this, the water is very low out here, and I kind of like these dry sections of land that are poking up through it. I don't want to miss out on those. So I'll move my horizon line and point of interest up here to this top third so that I have plenty of space to get all that dry land. Alright, I'll actually have that horizon just below that third line there. It's probably closer to what an actual third would be on here. I know a lot of artists who are very meticulous about their composition, and they'll go as far as measuring it out, which is definitely a viable approach. But when I'm out here on location, you really only have a couple of hours to capture what you're looking for. So I'll just rough it all in. It's this fun grouping of trees here. I want to make sure it gets in here. The underpainting I'm working on is really just to kind of establish where all of the elements of the painting need to be and get an idea of the lighting that I want to capture as I move along in the painting. Over the course of an hour or so, all of these shadows will change, and I like what I see now, so I want to make sure I mark that in so I don't lose it by the end of the painting. Also have a distant tree line here. And in person it's very flat and kind of uninteresting. So I think in the painting I'll give a little variation to the heights of the trees just to make it less uniform and a little more interesting to look at. And of course we've got all this dry land poking up in the water. The angles of these things are often like a lot shallower than you'd think they would be. It's easy to look out there and see a little patch of land and you know in your head that you're looking at something that's kind of circular. But from a distance, it's really just going to be a skinny little sliver out there. I want to kind of knock back these guidelines that I drew earlier so they don't distract me as I move forward. If I step back and look at it from a distance, I really like this composition. It's a good sign that we're good to move. In almost any landscape scene, when you look at it in real life, the sky is going to be brighter than almost any other element in the painting. It's a pretty rare occasion where that's not the case. And if you really want to make that sky feel natural and bright, you have to be careful not to let anything else compete with how bright the sky is in your painting. And mixing right into that color I made for the sky, I'll mix up a darker grayer blue using mostly blue and brown. I want to push this back line of trees into the distance more, and a good way to do that is to make it bluer than it appears, and maybe a touch lighter than it does too. I'm just going to block in the general shadow color here. I can always add my lighter highlights on top later. But right now I kind of want this to work as a framing element to make these bushes and trees here that are catching the light stand out a little more. And as we move into the distance here, I'll lighten this color up to make it feel like it's even farther back. We'll go ahead and move right along. I usually like to work my darker colors in first. It's typically easier to paint a lighter color over the top of a darker color. So dark is a good place to start. And we've got this really interesting deep green in the water. Darker than most of the stuff on the land, so I'll go ahead and mark that in. Not all the water's like that. There are certain areas where the current is jostling it around a little more and you can see more of the sky reflected in it. So I'll leave some space for that. And while we're here working on the water, we can come back to our sky color. Typically in a reflection of the sky, or a reflection of anything, the colors tend to be leaning a little more towards like a greenish gray. So I'll make sure to try and push the color in that direction while I work. You might notice if you look out at a water scene like this that as the water kind of gets closer to you, it looks darker. This is I've heard this referred to by digital artists at least as the Fresnel effect, and kind of just says that the steeper the angle of something towards the light source, the more it's going to reflect light from that light source. I want to make sure to capture that in my painting, and as we move closer to the viewer, the water will get a little bit darker. And we lost a little bit of our islands there, so I'll just kind of wipe with this paper towel to bring some semblance of that back. I know where I want it to go when I finally paint it. And now might be a good time for me to try and get that sort of calm movement of the water. A good way to do that is to just, oops, not like that. Let's get a clean brush so we don't mess up any of our colors here. Just gonna lightly pull these colors up and down to soften it and drag some of that shadow color down into the bottom. I think I want to switch to a slightly smaller brush as I work in these trees. I try to work with the biggest brush I can in most occasions, just to help keep me in line and prevent me from jumping into details too quickly. Oftentimes, if you make that transition into detail work, you forget to focus on the bigger picture. And really, in the beginning of a painting, the bigger picture is what matters the most. You can always add detail to a simple painting, but it's not so easy to reel in a painting where the bigger picture's a little off. So okay. I think I'll start with these middle ground trees because they are my main focal point in this painting. I want to make sure that they have the colors that I want them to have. Here we've got an idea of our shadow color. As we move back into the distance, the shadow color on those trees will get a little lighter and a little bluer. Doesn't have to be dramatically different, just a little bit to kind of show off that they are farther away from the viewer. And by the same token, we will make the shadows of the closer trees a little darker and warmer. And we have a couple of trees kind of framing out the other side here that need some shadows too. I'll mark those in. Now that we've got a general idea of that, I'm ready to start kind of moving into the highlighted areas here. I've mixed up a slightly warmer and brighter green to use here.
Oh, is this for Bernie? Oh, no way. Are you guys waiting for Bernie? Hey,
Bernie?
turn to the St. Albans Trail.
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Ooh, nice.
Thank you. Did you hear that? We're waiting for Bernie. Bernie? That's what they were saying. All right. As I add these highlights in, I'm just looking for the general shape. These bushes are certainly more complicated than what I'm painting here, but I really want that basic shape to be communicated first. Then I can kind of break it up into smaller shapes as I go along. Foreground trees are a lot less uniform want to capture just a little bit more of that chaos in the shape of them. And again, as we move backwards in the scene, I'm going to cool down this color just a little bit to try and show the distance. Ultramarine blue can give you some really nice blue mixtures, but it's not the most powerful color when you're mixing it with other things. My yellow and red are both stronger mixing colors than the blue, so it tends to take a little bit more of the blue to really push the color in the direction I want. And I think just to make these trees stand out a tad more, come in with a brighter green, just to touch the edge, make it look like there's a little bit more light hitting that outer edge of the tree. There we go. This is where I can introduce a little bit more noise and chaos into the brush strokes and break that very circular shape up a bit. You can see how that really brings out that outer edge and makes the tree stand out from the background that much more. Which is what we wanted. I'll do the same with these, just a touch. As I work, I'm definitely making some creative decisions, but a lot of what I'm doing is being directly informed by what I'm seeing. The colors I'm picking and the shapes that I'm painting really are heavily determined by what's actually in front of me. The idea is to capture the spirit of the place. Now we'll move back to those distant trees. And you'll see how quickly adding those highlights really brings those trees to life. Right now they kind of just look like a big blue blob. Once those highlights go in, it'll be a little more obvious what we're looking at. Now, these are mostly pine trees, and I don't want to lose that feeling of pines back there. So I'll be sure as I'm working on these treetops to keep them a bit pointed so that they read as pines. I'm kind of picking and choosing here how I want the light to be hitting some of these trees so that they don't come down too far and compete with this sort of point of contrast here. That contrast is really going to be what draws the eye to that area. So once you've been at this for a while and you feel like you've got the hang of it, you can start to push the light around in the way that benefits your painting the most. Okay. So now I feel pretty good about that. Let's move on to the grassy areas where the light is hitting. I did neglect to throw a few simple shadows in there, so I'll do that first. Just a couple to give this area of the grass a little bit of texture. I can kind of cut those in when I come in with my lighter color. Whatever section of your painting where the ground is facing the sky a little more, that's going to be typically the brightest spot other than the sky itself. So if I really want to capture that look of sunlight, I need to be sure to make my grass bright enough to do it. We've got a green we can work with here. Let's see how it looks in context. Might be a tad too vibrant. So I'll knock it back with a little bit of red to kind of push it towards orange. There, I like that a lot better.
Slowing.
I'm not sure about that either.
Nice. Do you know the river? Do you know what river this is?
Not sure.
And same with the grass. As we move back in the distance, I'll cool it down a little bit so it appears to be farther away. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be really subtle, but just a little bit of blue can help push that grass back into the distance. And we'll give our distant shore here a little bit of grass as well. It's definitely plenty of back and forth with painting. As soon as I added that lighter colored grass in, I realized that some of the shadows that the trees are casting onto the grass below them are maybe a touch too dark. So we'll come in still with a dark green, but a little brighter than what we had before. And I'm just gonna lighten those shadows up a touch. Yeah, I think that's working for me. I'll do the same here. And just to add a little bit more interest, I'll throw some more shadows into this area. Just to communicate that this isn't a perfectly flat, manicured lawn, but a natural, brushy area. All right. And now that we're in the final stretch, I want to make sure to get these sandy little bits of land here at the mouth of the river and extending out into the water, since that was something I was pretty interested in when I came out here in the first place. I want to be careful with this color and not overdo it, but I do want to paint it just a little more orange than it appears. I feel like those are colors that will play nicely with all of these greens, so I'll bump that orange up just a tad. This will be the only section of the painting that is bright enough to compete with the sky. But that's okay because it is an intended point of interest. Seems good. We'll just mark it in. I think I'd like to go even more orange than that. There we go. That ought to do it. There. That's a bit better. Now the water level has certainly risen a bit since we've been out here, but I did like that look of all of this sand coming up through, so I'll make sure to kind of lean it in the direction I felt was nice when I first arrived. We'll give it a little bit more of those sandy patches than what I'm actually seeing. And that's really the most fun part about this process is when you're out on location over the course of a few hours, your scene is likely to change, and at any given moment you could have something new catch your eye. And as a painter, you have the opportunity to latch onto that thing and solidify it in your scene, which is really cool. Almost there. All right, we want to get a little bit more of that sandy bank right there. That's good. And you've got a touch there. And you know what? What is a water scene in Vermont without a seagull? So as a last final touch, let's get a little gull in here somewhere. This doesn't take much. You can be right here. Maybe he's got And I think with that, we're ready to sign it.